Mayank and Shinjay for joining us here on the broadcast. But when we talk about the tensions there and the consequences, because the ongoing tensions in West Asia are now triggering concerns over possible fuel impact here in India. Now, what is coming across as a statement is by the RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra, who has now warned that the crisis in West Asia, if it continues for a prolonged period, then the government may eventually have to raise fuel prices. He says that the disruptions that are linked to the Strait of Hormuz are already pushing up global energy prices and increasing pressure on the energy import-dependent countries like India. And this warning is now coming amid growing concerns over shipping risk in the Persian Gulf region, where the Strait of Hormuz remains a critical route for global crude oil and LNG trade.
India is highly dependent on imports of energy, fertilizers. 1/5 of our imports are from the Middle East. 1/6 of our exports are to the region. We get about 40% remittances from there, 40% fertilizers, 60% gas. So we are highly, connected to this, to the region, which is right now in a crisis, and the supply chain disruptions, therefore, are, I would say, beginning to impact us. Of course, the price channel has already come into play. And here again, while, we have this toolkit, the framework, obviously, in such times, it's not sufficient. While, we cannot abandon it, because it's important, for anchoring expectations, but at the same time, we do recognize that it's not sufficient, and the fiscal coordination is very, very important.
Well, that is a statement coming in from the RBI governor himself, because he doesn't seem to be ruling out what could be the possibility next. And this seems to be a warning that is now coming across from the RBI governor Sanjay Malhotra, saying that India may have to eventually raise petrol and diesel prices if the West Asia crisis persists. And this remarks highlights the growing pressure on inflation, on fuel imports, and also on state-run oil companies that seems to be absorbing the higher crude costs. So that seems to be eventually what's going to happen as far as the losses that are being incurred on these companies. The loss to the oil companies are amounting to nearly 30,000 crores every month, and that is happening on the sale of petrol, diesel and LPG prices. And now what we are now looking at, because there is also a loss to the fuel retailers, around 20 lakh on petrol. We are looking at the loss on the fuel retailers when it comes to diesel, that is rupees 100 per litre. What we are now looking at, especially when it comes to these losses that seems to be mounting till the time we are looking at the government absorbing the shock and the cushion that is now been provided, so that there is no knee-jerk reactions or when it comes to decisions that has been taken till now. But that seems to be the very specifics that has now come across, especially when it comes to these developments are concerned. What the government now plans to do. Till now, the warning, the request that has come in from the Prime Minister himself, he seems to be suggesting that when it comes to the consumption of fuel, it should come down. But now we are looking at, as far as state-run oil companies that have been absorbing the higher crude shocks, and that seems to be, possibility on the anvil, that this is something which has not been ruled out by the RBI governor himself, saying that India may eventually have to raise petrol and diesel prices if the West Asia crisis is prolonged, continues to persist. And this remark actually highlights the growing pressure on inflation, on fuel imports, and also on state-run oil companies that have been absorbing the higher crude costs. So in the meantime, let's also talk about what's happening, because these seems to be on precautionary notes, that the center has now decided to shut the door on sugar exports as well, prioritizing domestic availability, and also amid global uncertainty and the supply concerns, because the government has now imposed a ban on sugar exports until September this year. And these restrictions are coming into force immediately, because under this revised export policy, why has it been necessary? The shipments of raw, white and refined sugar, that has now been, in a way, stopped. And this is now coming at a time when it comes to sugar exports that has been banned. And these are precautionary measures amid the tensions in Middle East. And the work is to prioritize domestic demand and to keep the prices under control. Now, what changes is the sugar exports that are now being prohibited, because earlier sugar exports were just restricted. And of course, India being one of the biggest manufacturers there, this is now coming at a time when it comes to a major policy reversal, as the government had earlier allowed limited sugar exports on expectations of surplus production. Mr. Ajay Dua is connected with us. Sir, can you help us understand, when it comes to this ban that applies on raw, white and refined sugar, do you believe that it also marks a shift in policy from restricted to prohibited, a major policy reversal, as the government had earlier allowed limited sugar exports?
Thank you for having me in this discussion. I think it does. Hitherto, government wanted to keep whatever item was in short supply, manage it through higher export duties, etc. But by prohibiting it altogether, the signs are that probably the domestic production of sugar, or the domestic output, the crop of sugarcane is not going to be as good as it may have been anticipated. As you know, the sugarcane crop is a long-term crop, 8 months in Maharashtra, etc. In southern India, 12 months, Baramahi they call it. So looking at the rainfall and the reservoirs of water which would be there, the government's estimation seems to be that the sugar prices could increase, hence, and they would not like that to happen, add to the retail inflation.
Yes.
The government has taken this measure of not allowing any exports of sugar, be it white sugar, brown, or even the raw sugar.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Dua. Appreciate you joining us here on the broadcast. We're looking at these back-to-back measures that have been, coming in and being taken by the government right after raising the import tariffs also on gold and silver. And these are part of efforts when it comes to the government of India to curb overseas purchases of metals as well, and easing the pressure on the country's foreign exchange reserves. We're going to head into a very short break. You're watching Times Now.